Welcome to Everything with Emily, where we talk about just about anything, whether it be pop culture, people's interests, or just generally what they've been up to. Today is the last show of September, which means October is just around the corner, and I have a very special guest, Kaysea, which is going to be talking about the goth scene and the local South Florida goth scene. Welcome, Kaysea.
Well, hello. Thank you for having me.
Well-
Ghastly weather we're having.
No, I know. It's been raining for like 3 weeks straight. So, how have you gotten into the local goth scene?
Well,
Or just your introduction to the goth scene in general?
let's rewind a little bit, right? So, goth is a very, very, very complex term, especially in modern age, because I think social media has had a huge impact on how we perceive goth. But let's go a little back into the past. So, I'm originally from Nicaragua, so an immigrant. And when I got to the States, my brother would play random movies on like the network, whatever cable we had. And so I was exposed to very early gothic things based on what was on TV and media and all that. And he had specific interest in movies like Underworld, and he would like to play games like Castlevania and all these things. And that's how I was first introduced to it, but I wasn't really sure what I was looking at. And I was really young. I was about 9. So I had no idea what I was staring at, but I was entranced by it. And so growing up, I had a very laissez-faire relationship with my family, so I didn't have a lot of their influences. And because of that, I was very open to exploring things on my own. And so when I got to middle school, I was introduced to English classes, and I think everyone in the U.S. public education system hates reading books that they're not entertained in.
Okay, I guess, yeah.
Yes. So I remember reading this one poem. I think the line that really stuck with me was, and we loved with love that was more than love, I and my Annabelle Lee, with the winged seraphs of heaven who coveted her and me. And that was by Edgar Allan Poe. And I just remember reading and thinking, this is so beautiful to me, and I don't really understand why. So from there on out, I went to the library, and because we had a book reading program where we had to read books for our grade, I started reading his stories, his poems. And for a project, I had to completely memorize The Raven.
Oh, me
and
too.
read it. Yeah, read it from cover to cover off the top of my head. And that's where I really began my introduction to Gothic literature. And so, what about literature makes it Gothic? Where does that adjective come from? And well, I did a lot of digging and research throughout my years, and I had a lot of sources to kind of read into, and I think that's what we're going to talk about. But before that, let me ask you a question. You mentioned that you like to read, or at least you remarked on that you like to read.
I've always liked to read, yeah.
So tell me a little bit, have you ever, happened upon Gothic literature?
I'm honestly not too sure what is considered to be Gothic literature.
Mhm.
I think I'm going to learn a lot more about that from you today. Like, yeah, just so everyone knows, I'm not too familiar on this topic, but I just wanted to give Kaysea a chance to tell me more about it. But he's also not a historian.
Yes.
But we're just going to have fun with it. I brought here Vampire Hunter D, which is like a really good manga that I like. I think that might be considered somewhat Gothic.
Mhm.
I'm not too sure. And I loved Edgar Allan Poe growing up, like The Telltale Heart.
Yes.
Yeah, that's great. But other than that, I'm not really too sure.
Yeah, so when it comes to goth, we have to go way, way back. But before that, I think, on some of like the modern things that I've been working on in terms of goth that have, or the reason why I'm here today is because I wanted to propel my Gothic studies, as I like to call it. And so I had this journal where I started to note and study all the things Gothic, going even further back up into the present. And so you and I previously worked in media and journalism. And part of me always wanted to use those talents in media to work on something I cared about, whether that was creative writing or Gothic literature. But alas, the nature of our work didn't really make it possible for that. And so post-graduating from FIU and, utilizing the resources that I had and experiences I gained from working in the radio with The Roar and then journalism with Panther Now, I worked with the media team. I'm currently working with a medium team called Study Break Tabletop. And my topic of choice actually is on Gothic tabletop games. And so the big question is, what does that mean? What is Gothic?
You tell me.
Right. And so I think this is a very important question that has a very complex answer. And, spoiler alert, the complex answer to that is that there's really no one way to pinpoint it. But we're going to talk about the different ways people see it. So we're going to start at the very base of everything, which is Rome.
Okay, wow.
The Roman Empire.
You're going way back.
Yeah, the Roman Empire. So what's your understanding of Roman history? Like the end of Roman history?
Wow, I didn't know. Putting on the spot. My history is low-key not that good. But I actually don't know.
So you probably know the Roman Empire.
I know a bit about it. Like, yeah, like there was a lot of wars.
Yeah, and as you probably know,
leaders, yeah,
the Roman Empire doesn't exist today.
Of course.
So it ended at some point, and part of that has to do with the Goths, specifically the Gothic people, such as the Visigoths and the Ostrogoths. So these were groups of people in Europe, and were mostly Germanic people. And so from a Roman perspective, anything that wasn't Roman, they were very huge supremacists. So they considered everything barbaric if they weren't Roman. If it wasn't Roman, it was barbaric. If these people from Germanic areas, and they call themselves the Goths or are attributed to the Gothic people, aren't Roman, they're Goths, they're barbarians, they're lower than us. So therefore their arts, what they do, how they dress, all those things are lower than Roman. So we actually move a little forward into a couple of years, because the Roman Empire is super, super, super important to Western history and how we shaped, how we looked at things, right? And so we're going to move a little bit to the 1500s. And here I'm going to quote specifically The Gothic Aesthetic by metadata librarian Rachel K. Fisher. And she mentions here that in the 1500s, painter, architect, and historian Giorgio Vasari popularized the term Goth as a pejorative term to describe a grotesque or barbaric aesthetic similar to the appearance of the destruction of Roman buildings. The ironic thing is that the buildings and castles and all these things he called Goth weren't actually made by the Gothic people. They were made by Europeans.
Of course.
Yeah, and so all these things were made by kingdoms and people of the city. So in France, I don't know if probably is archaic route to say this, but you know, the Republic of Czech, the Republic of Slovakia. I was going to say Czechoslovakia.
Yeah, I know they have a lot of like Gothic architecture still to this day.
The reason we call it Gothic architecture is from the 1500s. This guy labeled anything he didn't like as Gothic architecture because he described it as barbaric. And the reason for that is because they simulated the appearance of Roman buildings when Rome fell. So things that looked very sullen, had a lot of shadows, jagged shapes, things with reliefs and stuff that looked kind of like apocalyptic in a sense.
Of course.
And that evolved into a different style that went later on to be called the Gothic Revival, because people were like, you know, this isn't really that bad. And so the demonization of Gothic architecture came back into style and vogue. And if you know anything about fashion or art or history, things always come in cycles.
Of course.
Vintage! Yeah. So and I would say probably like the 1500s or even way, way before that, there's universities that are really, really old, and they have Gothic architecture because they've survived. But yeah, I would say there was a period of time where there was a Gothic architectural revival, and so it came back into fashion to make things out of that. And I actually saw this firsthand because around April, I was in a bit of a mood, and I was like, you know, I deserve a bit of a vacation. So I went with two of my good chums, and we went to New York, specifically Manhattan. And every block you go, you will find a Gothic church. I don't know why. And
I was going to ask you, actually, how come, like, the Gothic scene is kind of associated with religion, most specifically, like, Catholicism? Is that because of Romans?
So,
or, like, how does that work?
Again, it's a very complex answer, and you'll see the timeline of events as we get to it.
Okay.
So
spoiler.
Yeah, to see where we are right now. So Gothic at first was used as insult to things that weren't the mainstream of Eurocentric Roman, right? And then at this point, we know that things were mistakenly called Gothic that weren't made by the Goth people. They're actually made by Western Europeans for architecture. And we also know that it came back into style. So that leads us to, you know, what does that mean? What is Gothic architecture? And I think a really good example of that is at Notre Dame Cathedral, if you know it. They have a lot of barbed kind of spires and huge stained glass windows and arches, and they also have very stony kind of colors, concrete. Concrete wasn't really a thing yet, but it was very stone masonry.
Yeah.
A lot of glass, a lot of intricate metal framework. And a huge portion of the reason that was, and you'd see that in castles and cathedrals and other works of the public, has to do with religion, and it has to do with materials that are available to European countries at the time. So you won't really find that in places like Africa or Japan. Yeah. And the reason for that is because at that point in time, in the 1500s, they were coming out of the medieval period. And, you know, Europe wasn't this monolith. It was all these kingdoms that were fighting. And so they had to protect themselves, and that's where you get your castles. And then When they weren't protecting themselves, they would go to church, and that's where you get your cathedrals. And then maybe a library or government building that was sponsored by the state that was paying for it would have Gothic architecture, because that was the practice that was in vogue at the time.
Yeah.
When you think of goth, does the word gargoyle at any point kind of correlate?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there's a reason for that. So a lot of churches and castles would have gargoyles or demons or angels or mythical beasts like lions or anything like that. And it had a couple of reasons why. So from what I can tell, a part of it had to do with the engineering of it. And so part of it was supposed to be ornate and flamboyant. And another good example of that is the Marlborough Castle in Poland, I believe. But yeah, it was very important for those images to be there because they were used for flourishes, symbolisms, and the engineering of it, which was through the way of managing water. So rain, as we're experiencing today, is affecting us. It affected people in Europe back then too.
And I feel like the stereotype for the gargoyles is always like, maybe this is not true, but it was always like protection. That's not true, right?
So that has some basis in truth.
Okay.
So let's talk about the engineering portion of it. So they had to have a way to get rid of water, and they did it the most flamboyant way possible, which is creating mythical statues to direct the channel of water elsewhere. But the more important notion of it, which is the one you're thinking about, is the symbolism of it. So keep in mind in Europe, majority of the population couldn't read. And if you could read, you're probably a man. So
of course,
and you're probably a rich, well-educated man.
Yeah.
Yeah. So majority of people could not read. And how do you explain stories and messages to people that nowadays we're bombarded? If you go on the street, you see street signs, you see posters everywhere. People couldn't read. So they did it through imagery. And keep in mind that it was a very Christian nation, usually in Europe. And so the quickest way to deliver a message is through visuals. And so demons, angels, gargoyles, they all represented a reminder of, one, you're in the Christian faith. So remind yourself of what it means to be a Christian. And two, to be protective of that space. So in the outside world, there could be a lot of things going on. But in the church, it's supposed to be the most holy place you could be. It's supposed to be the house of God. So it was a reminder to, first check yourself. And two, that this is supposed to be sanctimonious. Respect the church, respect the people of the church, respect the space of the church that you're going into. And, what were these churches made out of? Gothic architecture. Where were these statues placed on? Gothic architecture. So over time, we start to blend these elements together.
Yeah, you associate them.
Yeah. But moving on from that, I'm going to jump a little bit into the late 1700s. So have you heard of the Enlightenment movement?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's mostly centered around art, correct? Or
well, art and philosophy.
Yeah.
It's what gave rise to the American Revolution, the French Revolution, and all these revolutions were against tyrannical states or kingdoms and monarchies. So people wanted reason, individualism, pursuit of human rights and all that. But over time, that kind of promoted rationality. That promoted thinking to the extent of like science will progress us. Human resolve will progress us. And so the Romantic literature movement was kind of a pushback against that. It was like, remember, we're human. Remember that we have wants and needs and desires. Remember that we're here not to progress just humanity, but we're here to live humanity.
Yeah.
So the Gothic movement was kind of very closely associated with that. And it was meant to provoke specifically want, desire.
Interesting.
Similar to the Romantic movement. But the reason it's called Gothic is because majority of these stories were set in Gothic atmospheres, such as, at this point, Gothic architecture is starting to die out.
Yeah.
So there's the revival of architecture, but all those old buildings and castles that were made in Europe like 1,000 years ago, they're falling apart. They have cracks. The nobility is, not there anymore. Aristocracy is going down. Monarchies are being overthrown.
The world is changing, yeah.
The world is changing. And so what was the remnants of the past of Gothic architecture is falling apart. And so that's decay. And since we're talking about desires and what we want, the flip side to the Romantic movement, which is the Gothic literature movement, is the decay that wants bring us, or the expression of not having things go the way you want it. So in a lot of poetry and a lot of stories popularized by writers like Mary Shelley, Percy Shelley, Lord Byron, Edgar Allan Poe, Horace Walpole, who made the first Gothic literature story called The Castle of Otranto. Literally, the castle's in the name.
Yeah.
A bunch of these people struggle with mental health issues, emotional issues, desires, the issues of romanticism. And by romanticism, I'm referring to the romantic movement. So specifically, like the issue with desire, whether it's love, the issue with escape from your surroundings. Let me go back and say that majority of these people who wrote these stories were people who had some measure to not work the fields, to not work a labor job. So they came from some level of wealth.
Of course.
And so because it was a more relaxed writing standard at the time, to say that these people had the ability to write, you start to see more inclusion to like women writing, specifically mostly at the time, white women. But nonetheless,
So
it was a change.
Is this one of the first times where women were writing more, would you say?
Well, it's hard to answer that question because periodically there are very significant women who write throughout time. But I think here it appealed more for women to write because this was the era of expressing your desires. Because of the romantic movement. So it gave liberty to a lot of women who were trapped by marriage, trapped by societal standards, trapped by their gender norms. Now, was it a full revolution of that? No. But, freedom opens little by little by little. And so a lot of these stories took place in Gothic architecture, and that's the Association for Gothic Literature. Moving on a little bit from that, you start to see a lot of interest in specifically morbid topics.
Guys, can you cut, please?
So to kind of round off on Gothic literature, a lot of it was about expressing desire and kind of going away from the norm that at this time was reasoning, enlightenment. And so romanticism, along with the goth movement, helped explore those thoughts of individualism, what I want to do with my life, regardless of what other people think. Kind of moving a little past that, you start to see, that interest in more morbid stuff, death. And that's very, very, very linked to Queen Victoria herself. That's why it's called the Victorian period. But Queen Victoria, if you didn't know, her husband had died at some point.
Yeah.
And so for the rest of her life, she wore black. And so Victorian fashion, and really a lot of British fashion at the time, was to mimic what the monarchs were doing. So a lot of people wore black because it became more standardized. And a lot of people wore black-related outfits.
Interesting.
And the fashion at, the Victorians at the time were long coats and dresses and frills and lace.
As you can see today.
Yes. And so that became vogue to wear. And she actually popularized funeral wear.
Oh my God.
No, before that, they didn't really have standardized funeral wear. I could be wrong. Full, what's the word for it? Disclosure. I don't know what I'm talking about. But I think for the most part, it was popularized by her. And then moving on to that, since you have a lot of expansion of the British Empire, they're going to places like India and places in Asia and Southeast Asia and places in Africa. And so very ignorantly, a lot of them tended to mix the culture that they found and kind of revere it as like mystical and supernatural.
Interesting.
And that's when you get a lot of those elements in Gothic literature, which is, ghost or some cursed object from India or some curse from Africa. That's when those elements start to bleed into it. And
makes sense.
Spirituality kind of starts to get combined with that. And so a lot of people have this mistaken notion that goth by nature is like satanic.
Yeah.
That's very erroneous. It's very erroneous because it really doesn't have to do with that. There are some people who exercise spirituality in goth, whether that's literature or music or whatever, but that's because the culture itself allows you to explore those topics.
Yeah.
It's not to say that any specific
of course.
Gothic subculture is related to
It's also kind of funny because I feel like I personally associate it mostly with Catholicism, really.
Yeah, as we just talked about, it comes from Catholicism.
But you know what I mean? Like, a lot of people are like, oh, it's satanic, but like, really, to me, it's more Catholic. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, some would say that some aspects of Christianity are Gothic in nature, such as the respects of death and I say death not as like the concept of death, but more like people dying, funeral rites. What's it called when people do candles? The vigils.
I believe so.
Vigils. Stained glass. You have all these Catholic imagery. And so Catholic wear also included, of the times, lace and whatever robes they had at the time. But it just so happens that the goth movement attracts a lot of people who are into more alternative religions. And, even a lot of the people who founded goth music were usually either Protestant or Catholic, and then they moved away from that or embraced it in a different way. And speaking of that, the Gothic literature movement went on and on and on. And then around the 1970s, the punk movement was a thing. And it was...
I'm very fond of the punk movement.
Yes. So it's around the 70s. It's been, 25 years since World War II ended. Mm-hmm. So the children of people who were World War II veterans and all that are growing up, and they're very disillusioned. They're disillusioned by how society's going. They're disillusioned about how people are treating the world, despite how much conflict has been. Nothing really seems to change. Yeah. And so they start to provoke their rebellion. They start to provoke how they feel inside. And it's very, curiously, a Western European thing. I'm not sure why it really evolved there, but I think it's mostly because Western Europe was probably the most ravaged by World War II.
That is true.
At least that we're aware of in the modern cultural Eurocentric worldview that we have. So that's where the punk movement evolved. And punk was all about doing things for yourself. It was the punk self-efficiency ethos. So their clothing often reflected thrifting. So, what was it to thrift in the 70s? You'd get clothes from people from World War I, from World War II, from their parents. So those were military clothes, military surplus, old coats, sometimes even Victorian or 1800s clothes. So lace, things your grandmother might have owned. And they started to blend that into their outfits. There's some people who started to blend stuff from other nightclubs, such as more underground nightclubs. Some of them happen to coincide with more queer clubs, queer-coded clubs. Some clubs are also bondage clubs or related to BDSM wear. Yeah. So people started to borrow elements from that, such as lace, again, vinyl clothes, leather, bondage clothes, harnesses, chokers, blanking on another term, but chains. Yeah. And they started to blend that into their outfits. And why does this matter? Why are we talking about punk? Because the goth movement, the musical movement, evolved out of punk. So in your opinion, what are some of the better goth bands?
I mean, when I think of goth bands, the biggest one I think of is, Susie and the Banshees.
Yeah.
Bauhaus.
Mm-hmm.
Bauhaus. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we're probably gonna talk about The Cure.
Yes.
I wouldn't say, no, they're not really goth. What else? I know there's definitely a lot more, but off the top of my head, those are the big three that I could think of.
Mm-hmm. They're all pretty much evolved from punk, and that was known as the musical post-punk movement. And actually, I own some of the books by Lowell Tolhurst, which is one of the founders of The Cure. And he has a couple curious things to talk about because one of his books was focused on the creation of The Cure and the actual live, I was going to say footage, but I guess a live documentary of, growing up and seeing the goth movement evolve right in front of you. And so he has a very curious thing that he says, and if I could just find it really
Cure? Quick. Yes. What?
Stop. Yes. He does talk about some of the fashion too. And, before we go into some of the other things he mentions, I was going to talk about what goth fashion was in the 80s. So,
can I actually make a point really quickly?
Of course.
I actually think that movement from the punk to the gothic music scene, I feel like it was also kind of bringing it to everyone. You know what I mean? It wasn't really for a certain group of people, because I feel like a lot of people we know, or even my dad loves The Cure and he listened to them growing up, but I wouldn't say he's necessarily into that scene. But I feel like it made it very global. Kind of available to everyone.
Yeah, accessible, global. And that was the beauty of it, really. That's what made it be so popular. And The Cure is one of the bands that really went out of Europe, went out of the UK to popularize it. But part of their striking image was their fashion, right? And so we just said that most of it came from punk. And then if you read Lowell Tolhurst's book, majority of the time he calls himself and everyone around him punks. We're punks. We do punk things.
Which I feel like now people wouldn't call it punk at all. So
yeah. I mean, it's curious to say that, post-punk isn't punk because we have such clear dividers about what we think goth is. But the reality was it came from that.
Yeah.
That's what it was. So he describes piercings. He had piercings when he was younger. And he even talks about the differences in the UK versus American punk scene. So he writes, in the UK, punk was more of a cultural, political movement. It had to be given the circumstance. In the US, it felt that it was a social fashion happening. This was in the early 1980s.
And that completely makes sense.
Yeah, you have to think about, America did suffer a lot of casualties in World War II, but their cities weren't destroyed.
Yeah.
London was being bombed.
It wasn't the same at all.
Yeah, it wasn't at all. So these people are jaded. They're angry. They want to express that, and they express it through their fashion. They express it by being nonconformist, and that's a very big thing about the punk and goth movement. They're nonconformist. The way they dress is sometimes blurring the lines between gender roles, blurring the lines about what's acceptable, blurring the lines about, what could they wear. So you see a lot of artists, show fashion in a different way. So when people think goth fashion, they think just black clothes. And there's basis to that. As we talked about, in Victorian fashion, people started wearing more black and frills and lace because of Queen Victoria. And in the goth movement, people wore black, whether it was leather or dark coats or military surplus that were darker colors. And then when you see it in black and white images, it just looks black. But people started to wear a lot more things. So they wore BDSM wear, leather. But they also started doing a lot of their own clothes from vintage stuff. They would find blazers and then pin them up, put lace on it. They would find military gear like hats and put chains on it. And they often talked about or expressed the androgynous nature of wearing these clothes. So a lot of, full disclosure, I could be wrong about this, but a lot of goth, I would say women as represented, you don't really see them wear these huge frilly dresses. They tend to wear something more punk oriented. So it wasn't very so clearly divided that you could look at a band and then off the top of your head, try to identify if they're following gender norms, because that wasn't the thing at all. They were all very nonconformist with their attitude, the lyrics. Some of it was more melancholic. Some of it was romantic, some of it was expressive, some things talked about death, some things talked about how they felt, some things talked about how they want the world to change or despair at the world. And that's why it was called Gothic, because it comes from the Gothic literature movement which did the exact same thing. And, we talked about The Cure, we talked about Susie and the Banshees, you have Joy Division as well coming into play, one of the earlier people. And the word Gothic was applied, I think, around 1967 to the band.
Depeche Mode. Hello.
Depeche Mode, of course, yeah. I think the earliest example I could find of Gothic was a music review. And it was a very bad review. It was a newspaper. I think it was about the Doors, but I could be wrong. The band The Doors.
It was saying that their music was bad or was poorly written?
No. They did not like their music.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. But they called it Gothic Romantic. Saying like, they're trying to be Gothic Romantic.
About the Doors?
Yeah, about the Doors. So that's the first time you see Gothic being attributed to music, and that was 1967. And then the punk movement becomes a thing, and then post-punk, and then people started to run with it, mostly because the press and fans started putting that label. But most of the musicians at the time didn't want to be called goth at all.
Yeah, I wouldn't say the Doors are considered goth, but it's such a funny take on that. Have you ever seen the movie like The Lost Boys?
I'm not.
Really? Okay, well I feel like they have like a whole like shrine in their little the whole basis is they're vampires in the 80s and they're lost boys, whatever. I'm sure you could gather what that means. And they have like a whole shrine of like Jim Morrison. And I think it's so funny because you would kind of consider them a little more like gothic, not really, but like they could be. So I would never like think those two would mix because I would never think Jim Morrison like that. So it's kind of funny.
I think in retrospect, they weren't saying that the Doors were part of the goth movement because the goth movement didn't exist yet.
But you know what I'm saying? Like that's just such an interesting take at that time.
Yeah, I think it was mostly because they were being pejorative. As I mentioned before, the gothic movement tended to be goth tended to be used as an insult.
Yeah, we don't like that. Okay, this is what it's called.
Yeah, so I think by calling them gothic romantic, they're calling them melancholic, melodramatic. They're expressive. Because by then, the Gothic literature movement had been over, and so people weren't used to that style. People were like, oh, that's so back then.
Yeah.
Right? So in the 70s, I'm not very acquainted with 70s, 60s literature, but I'm pretty sure Gothic literature was not the thing people were praising at the time.
Yeah, definitely not.
Yeah. So I think it was used mostly as an insult, but people ran with it over the years, and that's where you get the goth music scene. And, it started to evolve from the late 70s to late 80s. You have bands like Exmo Deutschland, which is in Germany. You have bands like Clan of Zymox, more in America, originally from Dutch. You have the British bands, Susie and the Banshees, The Cure.
Yeah.
mostly Western European bands.
I feel like people are mostly familiar with like the British ones.
Yeah, and part of that helped them because Britain is so globalized that influence went everywhere, and so it went to other neighboring countries, and you really start to see that in a lot of vast different countries like Japan, like Spain. And I think more modernly Africa.
Really?
Yes. So talking about global bands, there was a movement in Spain called La Movida Madrileña, which was a response to fascist dictator Francisco Franco. So when he was gone, people were like disillusioned, tired of World War II, all the damage. So the punk movement grew there.
Wow.
And then they had their own goth movement. And so some popular bands like that is Los Secretos and my personal favorite, Parálisis Permanente. And, you see some of the fashion in their bands as well. Eduardo Benavente, which was the lead singer, he uses a combination of different fabrics like jacquard and I'm blanking on the other one, but lace.
The theme of the day is lace.
Yeah, theme of the day is lace. And so he mixes a lot of colors, blacks and purples and reds and oranges. They would spike up their hair. It was very big for punks and post. 80s.
Liberty spikes.
Yeah, people would spike up their hair, but they would also tease it, which is when you get a comb and you back comb it and then put a lot of hairspray. People would wear makeup. The Cure famously wore a lot of eyeliner.
Yeah. Still to this day. You see Robert Smith rocking his eyeliner.
And that became his trademark. He would have messy red lipstick on purpose. And heavy black eyeliner. For Susie, she would develop what a lot of people to this day called trad goth, mostly because he popularized it, which was very sharp lines around the eyebrows and the eyeshadow. Most people mistakenly think she did black and white only. She didn't. She did a lot of color. She used yellow. If you ever see the music video for Spellbound, she uses yellow to match her outfit.
Actually, I haven't seen that music video, but I love that song.
The beauty of it is that a lot of people would use color in combination with black as a monotone color. So if they were wearing some sort of accent that was purple, they would match sometimes their makeup to it, or they would have something that would match. It would really help. Speaking of other global movements, you have Japanese goth, which would lead to visual kei bands, such as, Manas Misere and Yusei Tokoku. I like that one. So if you ever watch any animes, especially from those like in the 90s, they tend to use some of the music. So a very popular one is Future Diary, who uses music from Yusei Tokoku.
Nice.
You ever heard of Trigun?
Of course, yeah.
So Trigun, the anime, the original anime, uses music from a visual kei band, which skips the top of my head, but I know there's one. They have movements all over Latin America. We could go on, but
of course, we don't have all day.
We don't have all day. So, moving on from that, I wanted to ask you, from more global bands that aren't just British, do you know of any other gothic bands?
I honestly, it's more like I'm not too familiar of who is from where. I think, what was the Spanish band that you said before, the one that you really like?
Los Secretos?
I know, I think Los Internos, I believe.
Maybe. I don't know every... you like goth, name every Spanish goth band.
Like,
name
I don't every know. Spanish goth band right now.
Yeah, so I wouldn't know off the top of my head.
Yeah, but off the top of my head, like, I'm sure if I looked through my like songs, my playlist, I would find some. But I think off the top of my head, it's mostly British.
That's fair.
What would you say New Order is?
So New Order came from Joy Division after the death of Ian Curtis. So I don't think majority of people would classify New Order as goth, but if you listen to some of the earlier songs, those were songs that recorded with Ian Curtis, which, as we mentioned earlier, Joy Division was most definitely considered goth. It was kind of the prototypes for goth. You can actually see the transition in their music to reflect that.
And I feel like, I don't know, I feel like there's not a lot of like American gothic music.
Ooh, you'd be wrong.
Really?
They really blew up in the 90s.
That is true. But I guess, what would you consider American gothic?
So what we would consider gothic music, we talked about the fashion.
What would you...
We talked about the fashion, we talked about where it originated and the philosophy of it, but what does it sound like? So there's some stuff that actually talks about it here. But we're going to talk about, their heavy bass lines, their poetic, melancholic, romantic expression, use of moody synths, jangly and unsettling guitars. And a lot of those were really, really meant to invoke those feelings of either desire or dread or...
or sinister third option.
Or a more sinister third option, as you recall. I actually found the quote from The Cure. And Lowell Toher says, in fact, we resisted it despite our passionate insistence that The Cure was not a goth group. The Cure was very much a goth group. And part of it, what defined that was more ethereal, atmospheric, melodic music. You've heard of Cocteau Twins, I'm assuming.
Yeah, of course.
So Cocteau Twins isn't really a goth band, but it's attributed a lot to goth music. They're more dream pop. And part of that is because it's very ethereal. And so a lot of places that were advertised as goth at the time, they would play music, but they also have to keep the bills paid.
Of course.
So they would try to play more accessible music to people. And since they were played at goth places, people kept attributing them to goth.
That's why I kind of find it hard to like put music into a certain category because, yeah, like you're saying, like I wouldn't say this is goth, but like there's some things that I would associate with goth music.
Yeah. And that's why I said it's a very complex
It's kind of hard. Like, yeah, when you ask me at the top of my head, I'm like, I don't know.
Mm-hmm. But people, like the ethereal nature of Cocteau Twins music, and they would hear a lot of other things in those bands, which from nowadays...
Well, My Bloody Valentine, they're like shoegaze.
They're shoegaze.
Maybe they could also be considered a little bit that way. Like, so, I don't know, it's hard.
That's the interesting thing, because we have gothic music, then we have goth music. So gothic, so it's like, it's kind of...
And I think it's very interesting, because I know we were talking about how punk led to goth, and I feel like nowadays whenever because I mostly go to like hardcore punk shows, and I feel like you see like a good mix of people there that you might consider them goth or punk, but you're kind of not sure.
Because of how they dress or present themselves, or would you say it's because of the music?
Both, really.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like it's hard.
Yeah, so in world history, that's called cultural diffusion, when things start to blend together and take from other aspects. So I think those subcultures all started to kind of mesh together. And especially in an age where everything's so globalized and people are seeing things through social media, people start to blend things more and more. And, we live in a time where labels people really latch onto.
Yeah.
But what's really stopping a goth person from liking, I don't know, country music?
There's nothing. The alternative.
Yeah. So like, what if you pull up to like a country?
There's
concert?
Nothing. A lot of you see this blend every day.
Yeah. So I think people are starting to realize that their labels don't really define them.
Yeah, especially with music, because there's so many like subgenres.
Yeah.
It's, like if you ask someone, oh, like what are the genres you like? You could be like, oh, I like this, and then someone will be like, oh, but I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Subgenre from that genre, like yeah.
Yeah, and that goes more just beyond music. So, have you ever seen Coraline? It's pretty underground. It's pretty underground. I'm surprised you've seen it.
Who here knows Tim Burton?
Yeah, you've heard of Tim Burton. He's pretty underground.
Yeah, I don't think you would know him.
Yeah, it's okay. But Coraline is actually considered a goth movie. Because of the style, the nature of the story of Coraline is going to a parallel world where it reflects her fears, her subconscious, her psychology, and has those supernatural kind of elements to it.
Would you think that all of Tim Burton's movies are could be considered goth?
I think they're gothic.
Gothic, okay.
Yeah, but whether or not they're all goth, I would have to analyze all of them one by one and see if it measures to that. But
there's a scale. You have to check.
But what does it mean for a movie to be goth? We know how music sounds when it's goth.
Yeah.
It's ethereal, it's moody. It's we know how literature sounds. It's romantic, it's desire. But what about movies? I think movies are mostly characterized as goth based on the nature and environment they provide. And
probably also the visuals.
Exactly. So I have here a text from Edinburgh University called Gothic Film, and it mentions here, nature in Gothic novels and film is extreme. Mountains are treacherously jagged. Arboreal realms are dark, riotous, and rarely hospitable. Gothic nature threatens humans of the cultural and corporeal integrity by displacing them from its perceived perch at the top of the food chain and exposing us to the frail human condition that we inhabit. What does that mean? So, Gothic films, as attributed by this article, seem to denote that when a person is placed in a situation, they're reminded that at the end of the day, they're just human. They're not this superpower that's above human weaknesses. So, in nature, the nature can consume you. The wilderness can kill you. You can be killed by whether wolves, bats, a monster, a blizzard. And it's in those spaces that they tackle with their own psychology, that they tackle with their society, that they tackle with their inner society, which is how they interact with other people. And they're reminded of this. And the nature and the setting, I think, is what really makes something gothic by having its own character. If you read Frankenstein, the going back to literature, nature is constantly talked about.
Yeah, that's the main theme.
Yeah, nature versus humanity, right? And in films like this, they show that to another level. And we'll talk about two examples. So Dracula, the original Dracula, it's this huge castle, and this was like around the 1920s. And so Dracula, the main antagonist, he's not really human. He's a vampire. He's this monstrous entity. But the other people around him are succumbed to his forces. So it's this nature supernatural entity versus humanity. One of my favorite goth films is the Cabinet of Dr. Caligari. And if you see the movie, there's all these shaping settings, and it's made to make you feel very small and claustrophobic as a viewer. It's meant to express how the people who are impacted by the nature of the story start to kind of succumb to their humanity, succumb to forces greater than them, because at the end of the day, they're people who can't overcome some obstacles. A more modern example is the latest Nosferatu.
Oh, yeah.
So if you watch that, have you seen that movie?
Yeah, it was great. I saw it on opening day.
Okay. What did you think of it?
I thought it was great. I mean, I hope you don't think it was bad, but I thought it was great. I thought the visuals were great. The costume design was really good. I liked the overall story. I actually don't think I've seen the original Nosferatu, so maybe that might change my opinion if I did, but overall, I really liked it.
So you said you saw the visuals. What were in those visuals?
Well, a lot of like the architecture, I would say, was the biggest thing you see. Like,
yeah, but do you know the scene where he's in the forest?
When
main character.
Oh yeah, and then like the horses.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you're constantly made to feel like you're vulnerable.
Yeah.
Like you're alone.
Oh my god, especially the scene with the dogs.
Yes.
When they go pick him up, oh my god, yeah.
Yes, it's very daunting, and I think that's what it emulates, as said by this text. It's made to remind you that we're people, and that there are certain things that are stronger than us, or perhaps more vicious than us, and we should be reminded of that, because our own hubris, our own human ego thinks that we're better than everything else around us, and the world can check you on that.
Yeah.
And it's also, if you watch that movie, it's very expressive. He's freaking out constantly.
I know, yeah.
He's freaking out. Count Orlok is very menacing. He's very lascivious individual.
When I was watching that movie and he was in the castle, I think it was a few days he was in the castle, right?
Yes, he got bit.
Yeah, I was freaking out with him. I was like, whoa, what's going on? Like,
yeah, it's very gloomy, and a lot of people tend to think that horror is the only thing that connects goth to media. Well, yes, a lot of gothic literature was based on horror. A lot of early goth films were based on horror. But horror itself isn't gothic. It's what makes that horror to begin with that makes it gothic. So again, that explanation that humanity is vulnerable, that humanity isn't all-powerful, those are things that we, walk outside the door and we think, oh, I'm going to live today. But you don't know that. A lot of things can go wrong. And so those movies kind of remind us that humanity is very powerful, but at the same time very feeble. And that's what's very scary about it.
Yeah.
And kind of rounding off our media, Gothic games. So you've heard of Castlevania?
Yeah, of course. I've never played the game, but I've watched the show.
Yeah, so they're very Gothic. They have vampires, they have castles.
They remind me a lot of Vampire Hunter D, which I love.
But beyond that, what is it that makes it Gothic? I think it's the perplexing question of that you as a player have control. And again, you're face to face with that aspect that anything can kill you, that anything can be above you. You fight these beasts, you fight these enemies in these Gothic spaces. As we mentioned, literature was Gothic because of where it was based on. Some movies are Gothic because of the horror force of it was Gothic by nature. And music was Gothic because of the ideals of Gothic literature. So these games kind of mimic that in that certain sense. Have you ever heard of Bloodborne?
Of course.
So Bloodborne, again, is very Gothic. It has a lot of ties to H.P. Lovecraft's work. But at the end of the day, the architecture is very Gothic. And you're constantly made to feel like you're just this one person.
Yeah. When I think of Bloodborne, I associate it with my favorite manga, which is Berserk. Because it's very much somewhat... I don't know if it's like based off of Berserk, but like they're very similar in the stories and like the characters and the monsters.
What is it about? It's about a man going against forces way beyond his control, way beyond his power. So in a way, Gothic is both a celebration of the human condition, about that we have individuality, we can go against the world, we can go against conformity, but it's also remembering that we as an individual aren't as strong as we think we are.
Would you say that Berserk would be considered gothic?
I
don't know if you ever read it or...
I have. I never finished it, but I read a lot. It's a very dark series. I think it's more... I think it blurs the line between medieval and fantasy. And I would say it's gothic. Whether it's gothic manga, okay. I wouldn't say that.
Okay, that's fair.
Yeah. But that rounds our media. And I guess for now, I think what I'm currently doing is researching more things. And I'm working on answering a bigger question of, we identified what Gothic film is. We have identified what Gothic fashion is. Gothic music, Gothic architecture, the Goth people, Gothic video games. But now I'm at another crossroads. So I'm working in media and specifically at Study Break Tabletop. And we're looking at tabletop games. And I asked myself, I see all these games that are categorized as Gothic. What does that mean? How is a tabletop game Gothic? And that's kind of what I wanted to explore with the first game I covered, which is Gloom. And I'm hoping to find out more answers on that.
Well, I hope you do too.
Yeah. Oh.
Now, I mean, I know we're finishing up, but this is just a general question.
Yes.
I know a lot of people nowadays blur kind of the lines between, and this is not me saying that this is what it is, but people kind of confuse goth, emo, and alternative together. What would you say? I mean, maybe you don't know the main differences, but what would you say about that? That kind of mix, even though it's not really... It
is a little out of my scope, but I think by nature, goth and emo are alternative because they go against the mainstream. But as we're seeing, these things are becoming more and more popularized. So maybe at one point, these things won't be...
I guess it's also closely associated with, like, fashion and...
Yes.
And music.
Yeah.
That's what I would mostly associate the difference is with.
Yeah, there's no such thing as emo literature, at least that I know of. But
yeah, I don't know about that.
Yeah. Alternative literature has existed forever. Alternative religions have existed forever. Alternative fashion.
Alternative is very big, like, encompassing.
Yeah, anything that goes against the norm, that's alternative, you know? Mongolian throat singing is alternative in the US.
Mongolian throat singing is awesome.
Yeah, but I think that the blend comes from people being misinformed and people getting ideas from things where things coexist. So like I said, if you go to a goth bar and they're playing My Chemical Romance, you're going to be like, oh, this is goth music.
Yeah,
because
which is
you're
not.
Listening. Yeah, it's not. But you're listening to it at a goth bar, so you make that association. If you see goth people playing My Chemical Romance, you're going to think, oh.
Yeah. So kind of as like a final note, how would you recommend people in South Florida get into their local goth scene? So
we actually have a couple bands in the local South Florida scene. I'll name you a couple, but it's really there if you look for it.
Yeah, and I mean, as anything is.
I think part of why it might not be so readily available for people is Miami and really South Florida in general is such a huge hodgepodge, but we have a huge Hispanic influence. And a lot of people who are coming from, Hispanic countries are either, first-gen immigrants or families of first-gen immigrants. And they bring along their culture and their ideas. And a lot of Hispanic culture is tied more to Christianity, Catholicism, gender roles, more regulated fashion, a more conformed idea of what it means to be the South. And that's really the antithesis.
That's why I think it's so great to see Hispanics dived into the more like goth culture.
Yeah.
It's great.
It's a growing thing. And if you look at some articles, you'll see that it's more recent. It really blew up around COVID. I think that's because a lot of people are interconnected. They see these things and
they also kind of are more into themselves and they see that they have the chance to be something more that they want and get into something that they thought they couldn't because like they were conforming.
Yeah. Like, if you go your whole life without seeing the color purple and then you see someone wear purple, you're like, wow, I never thought I could dress like that.
Yeah.
I never thought I could wear this as a shirt. And,
or like, you're like, maybe that wouldn't look good on me. And one day you go out of your comfort zone and you try it and you're like, wow, I actually really like that.
So as far as I know, there's no global, worldwide, popular goth South Florida band, but we do have a couple that I'll read out the names of if you're interested in seeing.
Share with the audience.
So we have Obsidian. We have Lust, also known as Lucid Ultrasound Technique, which I actually went to go see at Bar Nancy with my friends last year. We have Violent Vicky, I like. A Starry Night, which has some interesting music and musicians.
Okay.
a little wink, don't you know?
Yep, I understand.
Cadaver Cable and Rook's Vendetta. Those were a couple I could find. In terms of clothing, there are some shops that sell gothic clothing, or it's labeled as that. And this leads down to another branch, which I will not get into because it's very, very, very out of my depth.
Yeah.
But with the idea of gothic clothing, we made a list of what makes clothing gothic. We live sadly in a world where there's a lot of fast fashion. And
of course, I know. I feel like Jesus Christ. I feel like lately, goth culture has kind of been associated with fast fashion. I don't really know why. Like,
so, I mean, remember that these companies are trying to make money, and so clothing companies are the same. And so, as we mentioned, goth and gothic have become more and more of a term that people recognize, and they have some sort of blurry idea of what that is. So, this shirt, I swear, you could probably find it in a store and it'd be called gothic shirt. It's not. That's not what it is. It's a shirt from the 1800s, but it has a specific name for that. But it's not by nature a gothic shirt. It's just that the goth movement utilized this type of apparel. And so they're trying to make money and they're trying to please an audience that wants now. They want clothing now. They want clothing of this style now. And so they have markup. They mass produce these things. And
which
so
I feel like the goth culture is very much against that.
Yeah, it's inherently against that. But because it came from, thrifting and modifying.
Yeah.
What was interesting in doing this research is that in the 1970s, a lot of men were trained in metalworking. Mm-hmm. And so they would, from wartime efforts and all that.
Yeah.
And a lot of women were trained in sewing. And so DIY came to them a lot more naturally than it comes to us because, sadly, we've become more used to 9 to 5s. And so we don't learn.
Capitalism, am I right?
We don't become, it's harder for us to learn new skills to modify our individuality. And part of it is self-imposed because we want things now.
Yeah.
We want Uber Eats.
Now. Give me it now. I don't want to make this.
Yeah, we want Uber Eats. We want Amazon delivery. We want clothes shipped to us. And so we have companies that do that immediately.
I know. It's a little scary if you think about it. We're going to not get into that.
Yeah, we see stories come across in South Florida. And I'm not saying all these stories are fast fashion because, again, that's out of my depth. But I believe Dolls Kill opened recently, and they have clothing that's labeled as goth. We have Freak House Miami, who sells gothic apparel, and some bands actually buy clothing from there. Now, I think it would be very, very ignorant of me to say that these are inherently not goth because it goes against its purpose. But I do think that we should very much consider what it means for a store to be gothic. If you go to Hot Topic, are you buying gothic clothing, or are you just buying clothing that has the big word gothic 50% off? Like,
of course.
Yeah. So
I think the real goth store is thrifting.
Yeah.
Yay.
But even thrifting has become the new thing.
I know.
Yeah. But
I'm not mad that it's become the new thing because it is a lot better.
Yeah, I think, there are some stories that people go thrifting and then they get all the items they want that are possible and then they just rack up the price later on, which is problematic in itself.
The resellers,
But I think this is the important thing is finding a way to alter it. Like this, I got it at Goodwill, like this blazer. It's just a regular blazer from like the 50s.
I think, actually, besides my shoes, my whole outfit is from Goodwill.
Yeah, we're wearing Doc Martens, and Doc Martens has its history in punk, but
I don't think
newer.
they can see, but look, we're both wearing our Doc Martens.
I don't know if they can see that, but Doc Martens were known for being blue collar shoes. I guarantee you, most people who wear Doc Martens nowadays probably don't work blue collar jobs. And the quality of Doc Martens and brothel creepers, which are a style of shoes, have really, really gone down. And part of that has to do with new economic practices.
Yeah.
And so that's when those man-made skills of like sewing, ironwork, cobbling, dyeing clothes, those have really gone out because our lifestyles don't reflect the inherent need for that. But to kind of give you a closing statement of my experience with goth is I'm going to read to you a quote again from Lowell Tolhurst. I promise I don't like The Cure.
You don't?
Yeah.
Wow.
But Lowell Tolhurst wrote this in his book, Cured, The Tale of Two Imaginary Boys. And he wrote, "People don't like that. They want you to be one thing or another. If you don't fit into a neat little box, they get upset." And I think that's really the importance right now of social media and labels and people belonging to subcultures, that everyone wants to belong, but no one wants to belong in a place that's so readily mainstream because everyone wants to be in a group, but not be the outcast of a group in the sense that like, oh, I'm just like everyone else. Mm-hmm. And so people cling to labels, and that's why we're so easily like manipulated by people selling and catering to us, like, here, buy goth clothes, here, buy emo things, here's goth art and all that, because we fall victim to that because we want to belong.
And we want to feel seen,
Exactly. But we don't want to feel too seen to the point that it's like the norm.
It's kind of a weird balance, especially in like modern culture. It's hard.
And I think in Miami, since Miami's a hodgepodge of people, to to kind of route it all back, romanticism, the goth movement, the punk movements, they all came from a want to be individual and to do things for yourself and to live by your rules.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I were to have a kind of a preachy message, is that to be goth, in essence, is to do things for your sake, but also to do things in a way that you want your life to be fit.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're not very happy with the world around you, I think you should maybe make movements to try to change that.
Well, thank you. I like that last little closing line. I feel like that's definitely very important to like the main message of my show. It's just kind of like, hey, don't be afraid to get into new interests, talk about what you like, and find new experiences and show it to other people. But don't be afraid that it's not necessarily the norm. Yeah.
And I think especially it's very poignant considering the current political state.
Yeah.
But a little reminder that November elections are coming to Miami.
Well, yes.
Yeah, so do with that.
I've heard about it every day at this job.
Do with that as you will. But for now, keep your mind open, have your heart open. I guarantee you probably saw me on the street. I probably looked like a freak. But I think if you knew me a little more, I think you would know that.
Yeah.
You wouldn't really describe me as goth. I think you would just.
I wouldn't.
Some things I like. Right?
Exactly. So you're just into the goth culture.
Exactly. So.
Well, thank you so much, Kaysea, for being on my show. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope everyone had a great time listening to this yap session. I actually learned a lot, like a lot that I didn't really know. So thank you so much.
Of course.
Okay, well, bye everyone. Thank you for listening.